Welcome to Our Public Therapy, a show where we got problems and we talk about them a little too publicly. But is that kind of the point of the show?
It is. It's to get it off our chest in a way, and then put it onto your chest. And then after you've analyzed it and provided some sort of feedback, put it back on us, hopefully lighter than it was.
That's the goal. I'm Joe Jason,
Along Harold Owens.
and we have a very special topic today, but I don't know what it is. Harold, what is our special topic?
So, what we're going to be discussing today, following our check in episode about bucket list destinations, these are destinations we've actually been to.
Yeah.
And we're just going to be discussing places we've been, experiences we've had there, maybe some of the backstory or reasoning behind going there, in hopes that those experiences were beneficial, because I could already say they helped me. And I do think travel is a type of medicine. It's not great when you're forced to do it. That's a totally different scenario. But when you have the freedom to move around, I do think it's good for the health. So
True, and
that's the thinking.
I would also say that even when you're forced into that situation, travel is a form of change, and how you deal and handle with that change is something that really can help shape you in positive ways if you let it. Because I'm even thinking of like my family relocating. So my first travel that I can actually pinpoint and have memory of is moving from Arizona to the Midwest when I turned 4 shortly after we moved here. So I was young enough where, the memories aren't so much like fully formed memories as much as like a PowerPoint slideshow. So I have like little bits and pieces of the memory of coming over here. And that completely changed the course of my life, right? Be a very different person if I had stayed in Arizona.
Yeah, you would have graduated from ASU and
Yeah.
probably not been a businessman. You'd
No,
been a party boy.
I probably would still be like partying, like not having like gotten off the campus. Hey, there's some history in the family of enjoying our drink a little too much, and so I think in the wrong situation I might have overindulged. But that's all to say that that travel was something that lost me my foundations for like friends and like the school, like preschool I was going to, and created new opportunities elsewhere. And travel that isn't voluntary, it has some like struggles with it, but can also be a benefit to you if you use it the right way.
Yeah, that's a very holistic view of the situation. You can make the best of a lot of situations. I was thinking, in the most extreme sense, it's really hard to think positively, but that's not something we're here to discuss, because we can barely deal with the mundane problems, let alone mass exodus.
Yeah, refugee issues I think deserve a topic
That's
all on their
totally
own.
separate. We're not gonna address
That's a
it.
topic all on their
Okay,
own.
but that kind, yeah, I could totally see it. Make the best of the situation.
Yeah, then let's do kind of a more mundane version of unwilling travel. I'm sure, because this happens to every like child and family, that you've had to go somewhere with your family that you didn't want to go. Sometimes it's as small as just like a trip to the dentist or doctor, and sometimes it's, I don't know, maybe you're not a beach person and your family was trying to like go on a small beach vacation. But can you ever remember really not wanting to go somewhere with your family, but it was going to happen anyway?
So, both of my parents were in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Since retired. So I can speak to a lot of moving around in my youth. And one example is I would often spend summers, so for context, we lived in Texas at the time, and I would spend some of my summers in Mississippi at my grandmother's house. dad's side. And the second time I loved it, but I remember not wanting to go the first time. You know, I'm like, what is a Mississippi? Who is this grandma you're talking about? You know, can I bring my Sega? These were the things that were concerning me. And also, I don't think I had ever traveled that far, you know? So, like, road trips, even though you're a kid and you can sleep the entire time, it's like you want to be up and about doing stuff.
Yeah, and you're trapped in a small box.
Yeah, and the Game Boy doesn't have a backlight because it's the 90s. So it was a struggle for child Harold. But I enjoyed it a ton. I had never had so much open space. It was Biloxi, Mississippi, I still remember.
Yeah.
And what stood out to me the most, at least right now, maybe it wasn't distinct as a child, but the memory is super clear. It's the drive in to her property from like the main road. And it was like this fantastical forest trail where like it's overgrown. Like the road is clear because people drive it, but anywhere that a car hadn't been was just covered in like leaves. So what I remember most is being able to stick your hand out and just touch a bunch of plant life. And it was like you're giving high fives to every bush and tree along the way. That was fun. And then at the end of that trail road, it opens up into this big grassy plain with like this little quaint house in the middle. And that was a first for me, you know. This little creaky swinging screen door. And yeah, grandma and grandpa on the inside. So, I mean, they're not watching this, but shouts out to Gam Gam, because I had a lot of my best experiences just exploring forests in Mississippi. They had a little lake behind the house. You go down a hill and there's a little lake there, and that's where they got a lot of their food because you could just fish it.
Yeah.
Get catfish, which I've since learned are like disgusting, but taste great. They just eat everything.
Bottom feeders be like that.
Yeah, they're bottom feeders, but you know, you clean them up right and it's good. It's good eats.
Yeah.
So yeah, I learned a lot of skills, I guess. I mean, I was a kid, so I wasn't good at it, but you know, at the very least I could learn how to like you know, carry them. You know, that's something kid me could do. So I remember you know, coming up from the lake after my grandpa or my sister, my older sister, had fished, and you'd have this little bundle of like these massive fish, and you take them up, and then they do their thing. And I also remember how weird it was that the scales just like pop off if you do it right.
Yeah.
I always thought that was odd. I thought they were stuck on there, but if you do it correctly, they just pop off like popcorn and end up with a descaled, gutted fish. I don't know, for people that don't eat fish, I guess that's a bit gruesome, but kid me loved it.
Heck yeah.
So there we go. That's something I didn't want to do that ended up being a recurring thing. I probably spent 4 to 5 summers in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's something where even when you don't necessarily have the financial means as a family to do long trips or make big changes, I just think being able to travel within your own means, your own capacity, is like such a valuable experience. Because like, just think about the way that opened up your perspective and changed how you were able to like see things and new skills that you said you picked up by just going to see family. And you know, even if somebody's only able to travel so far as like leaving their own town, I think that's such an important thing to do, because I think that we get so comfortable in what we're used to and familiar with, and just being able to step outside that, even to, you know, a different town or just a different like geography, really helps us like open up to things that we wouldn't otherwise like perceive.
Yeah, I totally agree. The people that you could meet outside of your immediate locale are able to provide you with perspectives that you couldn't get otherwise. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that is the cure to some sort of issue. I don't know, probably like at the very least closed mindedness or just some limited perspective, things that you could learn maybe easier elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Think of like the city boy trope, someone who's lived in, let's say, New York City their entire life, never been to anything other than this big bustling town. Like, you learn a lot in that city, but I don't know, maybe you've never changed a tire in your life because you just always take the train or subway.
Yeah.
It's a skill you pick up. Maybe you, on that trip, first time you've ever had a car, tire pops, It sucks, but hey, now you know how to change a tire.
Yeah, or even if that's not what you do, because, I don't think it's essential that everybody knows how to change a tire if they're not going to drive. But I think that learning to understand and respect what, like, somebody who has that skill has to go through in order to acquire it and apply it,
Yeah.
I think that's far more important, right? And you get that by actually, like, traveling and seeing a different perspective. Like, something that I know that I brought up in our conversations, I don't know if I brought up on the podcast, is a little town in southern Indiana where my friend Heidi went to school. And she tells this story about how the town was pretty typical, like, low-key racist, right? So no KKK memberships, but just kind of generally uncomfortable when new people moved in. And then a black family moved in, and there was what I would call, like, modern bullying, which is just kind of like exclusionary, like, kind of keeping to themselves and then just like kind of giving dirty looks and stuff. But then,
Yeah, polite racism.
yep, but then their eldest son went to high school and he started to like get involved in sports, and that started to get him in front of like the townspeople more, and they started to be able to integrate into community life there by having their son essentially like make friends on his teams. And that direct interaction that he had within that space allowed his family to then start to make connections there as well. And that's something that you don't get if you stay in a specific area, right? The cure for their racism was somebody moving in. The cure for a lot of other people's is them being willing to move out, see a new area, new culture, new community, etc. And even not speaking specifically to racism, but just expanding your horizons as a person, I think that's one of the best things that you can do is go to somewhere that's just different than your own comfort zone and meet people there, learn about how the culture is different. Because even just like thinking about our own city, like, you can probably go to different neighborhoods within the city and find a completely different culture. So don't need to travel very far to get an experience that is different than your own backyard.
Yeah, especially if you're limited in your means to travel. You don't need to go far necessarily to encounter new people or different experiences. So the Mississippi trip is one of my earliest ones, but kind of like you, we did eventually end up in Indiana, but that
Yeah.
was later. I wasn't 3 or 4. I think at the time I was probably 8 or 9. So my memories are a little clearer because I was older, but it's still fuzzy because, it's 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
But that was actually the longest road trip I'd been on, which is from basically Dallas to Indianapolis. Very long trip.
I mean, half of that's probably just getting out of Texas.
It really felt like it, and probably is close to being true. Like, cause once you get out of Texas, you could bust through 3 states in the same time it took you to get out of Texas. But my main memory from that road trip, I guess from the end of the road trip, is like pulling into this new house, the driveway for the first time. You know how parents do. It's like you're definitely asleep at this point.
Yep.
So they like don't wake you up until it's like there. Like this would be kind of a cruel parent thing to do. What I would do is wake them up like 40 minutes out, So you could fall back asleep, but you'll probably just be up. Yeah. So it's like we're in this together, but my parents were nice, so they let us sleep until you could wake up and be done with all the driving. And that was nice. So nice. I still remember that to this day, like waking up basically in front of the driveway. And fun aside, my mother went trick-or-treating with my nephews just recently, and they visited that house.
Aww.
So now I have a picture of all my nephews in their costumes in front of my, childhood home in Indy. And that made me feel very happy.
Yep.
It's cool. Cool memories. And
Heck
I'm sure they got all the best king size candy because that's a very, very hoity-toity neighborhood. They don't skimp on their
few houses have the full-size bars.
Yeah, if you know where to go.
I remember one house in my childhood neighborhood had those bars, and we would strategically make our way there before it got too dark, so that way we just knew we wanted to get there before they ran out, because that was going to be a hot place.
Yeah, you show up late and all they have are Smarties.
That, or they've already shut off the lights and they've done their deed for the day.
Right.
Though, quick side tangent, has it just gotten colder during Halloween since we were kids? Because it was straight up snowing this past Halloween for us, and I don't remember it being nearly that cold during Halloween growing up.
Yeah. Thinking back, I don't remember being bundled up even kind of late, 8 or 9. You could still just be in a costume and maybe a jacket towards the end. So I don't know. Maybe as a kid you're just so hopped up on sugar, your body temperature is raised or something. I don't know how bodies work. I think we're just old now. So the cold
the nostalgia
gets in.
warms you.
Yes.
Fair enough.
Okay.
But we talked about the importance of travel when even when you don't have a budget. But occasionally you do. Sometimes you can put some money in the gas tank or even get a ticket. So what's been some of your best travel not restricted by a budget?
Okay. So I may not have mentioned this on the podcast, but Joe's very aware of it. I was, in my heyday, a professional yo-yoer, or return top thrower, if you need to use the generic term, because apparently Duncan, the company, has a copyright on that term. So that's why I didn't know this, and I've been yo-yoing for over 15 years. Other yo-yo companies can't advertise their product as yo-yos. That is Duncan exclusive because they're the OG. So a lot of times on the packaging you'll see return top. But anyway, because I did that, it opened up some avenues for me as a young adult, pretty much right out of high school. I think some of my first travel was even before high school. I got a company that I was not yet officially sponsored by, but had eyes on me to send me places. I couldn't afford plane tickets, but they could. And that was such a odd experience, you know, like getting dropped off at the airport because I'm not old enough to drive, but yet I can, you know, fly to a different state.
Heck yeah.
A lot of times we did drive because I had the support of my dad at the time. I don't know if my mom ever drove me. I mean, she was supportive, but she wasn't the chauffeur, you know? Like, my dad took me to, I think the first one out of state was Tennessee State Yo-Yo Contest, and I went with a high school friend of mine who also yo-yoed.
Mm.
So that's one type of travel, but the first one that I flew to was, now this is bringing back some bad memories, but it turned out well because of what you're talking about, you know, making the best of a situation. So in 2010, which was, I think, my junior year of high school, there was a national yo-yo contest, and at that time they were always held in Chico, California, and I got tickets through Yo-Yo Factory to go out there, and my dad was going with me. So both of us going to Indy Airport, flying Delta, bit of foreshadowing, and long story short, we got stuck on the tarmac at one of our connecting flights so long that by the time we got off the plane and rushed to the next terminal, the plane wasn't gone yet, which is even more frustrating, but the gates were closed. And in speaking to this, I don't know, not flight attendant, but desk person, they had resold our tickets. So, like, we just couldn't get on the plane. Like, the seats we would have taken had someone else on them.
Yeah.
And I still remember this. Like, I was sad. My dad was ticked off. And I think rightly so, because that's just terrible, terrible customer service. It was of no fault of our own. I would totally understand if we showed up late due to our own actions.
Yeah.
But we could not physically get to the terminal until we got off the last plane.
Yeah, and it's one of their planes, so...
Yeah, their fault. And they know it's their fault, and yet they sold our tickets, and their only recourse was, here, we'll give you a voucher for, you know, tomorrow morning. And that just doesn't work, because the contest is tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
So my first attempt at going to the National Yo-Yo Contest ended in tears and disaster. And I was just so torn up because I'd been practicing for months. I had a routine. I had my music, little CD with me, everything. And I was just so distraught. But as this is our public therapy, there is a silver lining.
Heck yeah.
Because that gave me an entire year and more determination than a high schooler should probably have to make sure that next year that didn't happen. And that actually was the first nationals I ever went to, and I won. So 2011, U.S. National Yo-Yo Champion Harold Owens. Well, it was my first national event. And I actually don't think that would have happened if the first event had happened. There's an alternate universe where, you know, the flights went well. I showed up 2010, you know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and I got like 17th place. And I was like, that was fun. And then I just stopped, you know?
Yeah, because you found out that you were pretty good. And so your confidence level is like maintained. And it's like, all right, next time, let's try to get to top 10.
Yeah.
Rather than be like, oh, I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them.
You'll see. They'll all see, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to this day, I still think fondly of how unfun that experience was because it led to some of the best years of my life. So, yeah, that was maybe even my first flight, actually.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Cool stuff, man. What about you? Something a little further from home.
I don't know, like first flight I can remember was like coming back to Arizona after like we had moved initially. So me and my brother were taken back because my mom was visiting some friends and family there. And it was fun. It was like a great time, but it was also really strange to see my mom had a life outside of what I had known because, again, most of my memories of Arizona are just like a few PowerPoint slideshows. Like I can remember things as though I'm looking at a like photo album.
Or one of those old toy cameras where you click the button and then there's like a different character from Lion King.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so little things like that. Like I remember having a birthday party there. I remember playing a Donald Duck game on a computer, but I couldn't tell you what the game was about or anything. There are just like little bits. And so it was really strange seeing my mom interact with her sister and her friends and have just like a community and a life that was so distinct and different than what I had seen before. And then when I started to do some traveling that wasn't for family, I think my first experience was going with my church down to Mississippi in just a like really kind of rundown area where we were trying to partner with some churches there and like try to establish some places for a rec center and some education and help out. And yeah, that was my first kind of taste into uh, what eventually I ended up, studying school and try to do now, which is like economic development and poverty relief. Because that was my first like real taste of poverty after growing up in a like where we grew up has a pretty good mix, but it's all a mix of like upper middle class. So we have people in our town that were as wealthy as you can possibly be without needing like a full like security team around you 24/7. And then we also have people who are just like living in apartments in order to give their kids like the best education they could. And so I was always growing up in middle and upper middle class environments with little like snapshots of poverty when I learned about like family who wasn't as well off as we were, or like trips to the city where we like volunteered with like food pantries and stuff. But this was my first time like being immersed in like poverty and realizing that some people just don't have it as like fortunate as you do, and that is a gift and it's something to be grateful for, but it's not something to like hold on to so tightly or to become complicit with. Like the fact that you have some more than other people isn't something to feel ashamed about, but is an opportunity for you to give back and help others as you yourself have been helped. And so that was just real eye opening, as well as a opportunity to step into some roles that I hadn't had a chance to step into. Like I remember that was the first time that I really had to counsel and console some other people who were going through some stuff.
Now, were these residents of Mississippi or like peers that had come on the trip with you?
It was both. And
Okay.
so like the residents of Mississippi that I was working with that I did some like light counseling for were all kids that we were putting on kind of a summer camp for with a church and a rec center that we had partnered up with. And so some of the kids, would just, tell stories that are stories that, plenty of our listeners will have experienced, or at the very least, we all know somebody who's gone through something where just absentee parents or just going in and out of homelessness because like they didn't have enough funds or their parent lost a job, etc. And just the best that I could do for those was just walk through it with them and have a chance for them to share what was going on in their lives and have somebody care enough to listen and be there. And then talking with, more of my peers who were like sharing their own things, I could try to actually give advice and go through that. Because what I found is that money can kind of change the scale, but the problems are still all just human problems, right? And there were plenty of, like my peers who, had an absentee parent and just happened to, have one parent who was still around who had a better job, which was the only difference between them and the kids we were helping out with. Or, they were, like I remember one girl's parents were going through a nasty divorce, and this was both a break away from that stuff, but also was like her finally dealing and confronting it without her parents around to kind of encourage her to put on a front, right? Like her parents weren't being explicitly manipulative, but it's really hard to be completely vulnerable and honest with your parents when they're in the middle of something like that.
Of course, you don't want to hurt either, especially Absolutely. When you're like, choose who do you want to live with. Like that's not something you ask a child.
No, not unless you're a horrible parent, and even worse, a horrible set of parents when you're trying to like play the kid off the other, and it just like that's something that I didn't really come to understand well until a later trip actually. Like I had an opportunity to go to like Kenya as part of an internship, and what I learned there was very similar as far as like the problems I saw in Kenya were the same problems that I saw in the US, but there was just a different flavor to them. And like there was like one family who had just this he was like such a bright kid, but he was also like just athletic and sporty, and they were putting so much expectation on him for soccer and football specifically to try to get a scholarship so he could go to a good school, so that way he could make money so he could take care of them.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and there are not dissimilar things that happen in the US with putting pressure for kids to play basketball or American football, and just putting expectations on kids to be your salvation rather than you being a parent and you being their protector. And the other aspect, which is more of a poverty thing, but I saw the same issue in Kenya that I saw in Mississippi that is also the same problem here in Indianapolis, but it tends to be more of a poverty problem, which is that there were also some parents who did not want their kids to do better than they did.
Oh yeah, the crabs.
You think you're
bucket.
better than me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
crabs
that's
in a bucket mentality.
Yeah, and that was something that I saw as a big poverty thing, but like being able to travel and go to Kenya and go to Mississippi and like see that these are the same things that just have a different shade, right? It's it's kind of like a different skin on the same model, right? To use video game terms. Yeah. And so they all have the same kind of issue, and it just looks a little bit different because they're setting, but the same brokenness and like human element was there.
So one thing that is standing out to me in telling these stories, and even tying it to our check-in episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of parallels in the places we've traveled.
Yeah.
Because, okay, first off, you're from Arizona originally, and you've been back before on your mother's side. And then I mentioned how some of my first travel was paid for by a company called Yo-Yo Factory, who was based in Chandler, Arizona.
Hey,
So I've been to Arizona. I visited the Yo-Yo Factory, and I've lived there for a summer.
that's actually where I was born, Chandler.
Chandler?
Yeah.
See, that's even weirder.
Heck yeah. Yeah. So
Okay.
we were living in Scottsdale, but that's where we were when I was born. Moved to Scottsdale shortly after.
Wow. Okay, so there's a weird parallel already.
Heck yeah.
Your birthplace and the birth of, my long-lived passion for yo-yo.
Yeah.
I think, had I maybe not done well the second time, or well, the first time I actually made it to nationals, then I probably wouldn't have gotten like an official sponsorship, and then I wouldn't have traveled to Arizona. I wouldn't have met all these people that I still talk to. So it's this fun cascade of events.
Heck
And
yeah.
then another weird parallel is I mentioned going to my grandmother's house in Mississippi
Yeah.
for multiple summers. There's already one parallel
Yeah.
because you did some travel and philanthropy
Yeah.
there, but also I went to college. My undergrad was in Jackson, Mississippi. So, yeah, Arizona and Mississippi showing up in both of our lives.
Heck yeah.
And then another aside, not to anger any Mississippians out there, don't quote me on this, but I think Mississippi is in like the top 5 both for like poverty and obesity.
Those things unfortunately tend to correlate pretty
Is
well.
there a yeah, that
Yeah.
it would make sense.
Yeah.
And it's sad to see because I've been there multiple times and I love it. There are beautiful places. It's not all poor and fat. But statistics kind of strip away some of the nuance of the place.
It is true, and
But it's a reality you got to
Yeah.
confront.
as well as a state is a big place. Like I just got back from Europe, and most states are about the size of a European country. So you can have a city in one part that's completely different than a city in another part, and the different towns are going to be drastically different. There was kind of a joke that is semi-true that we used to say when I was going to school in southern Indiana, which is that once you're an hour south of Indianapolis, you're essentially in the deep south. Because southern Indiana is very different than central Indiana, that is different than northern Indiana, as far as just like kind of the culture that like comes with that. Because it's all kind of mixed rural, but there is more of a Midwestern vibe for central Indiana, even when you're in the rural parts, than rural southern Indiana, which is much more similar to a Tennessee or Kentucky.
Right. Yeah,
So-
within the state, a lot of diversity of thought, opinion. Many differences.
Yeah, and even just like culture, it's we were talking about this a little bit on the check-in, but for areas like Western African countries where you have a lot of just tribes or villages that aren't super connected to the larger cities, they develop their own language that's kind of disconnected from the like dominant language there. And likewise, you kind of get a culture that's all its own when you have just like smaller towns and whatnot throughout a state. And so a lot of the like bigger issues for poverty and obesity that you're going to see in a lot of southern states are less so in the major cities as much as just like how a lot of different like towns end up being.
I could see that because in the college town that I was in, Jackson, there were plenty of people that weren't obese, but I'm
Yeah.
getting this weird little microcosm of
Yeah.
the state where, not everyone is from Mississippi. There were a lot of out-of-state students. And then even the people that are from Mississippi might be, say, the more athletic ones, right? If most of your friends are on the soccer team then you might get the opinion that there's not a lot of obesity here. So yeah, it kind of speaks to our main message of getting out of your kind of immediate locale and comfort zone, and you get a wider perspective and a better understanding of who's around you.
Absolutely. Like when I had a chance to go to Haiti with my church right after the earthquake hit initially, and it's that island is amazing for many reasons, but one of them is just from space you can tell where the Haitian and Dominican Republic border is, because one side is green and lush and the other is just brown and barren because of the history of the two nations and how it's just differentiated. And so if you're on one side of the island, you're going to have a completely different perspective of it than if you're on the other side. And so if you don't ever cross over that like green border, then you're never going to see the difference.
A question about that
Yeah.
island. When an earthquake hits, is it equally bad in both countries? Like, I mean, it's an earthquake,
Yeah.
but for some reason, I imagine that there's like maybe less infrastructure or more damage on the side that doesn't have a bunch of lush greenery, or
Yeah. Well,
were they both devastated? Because I didn't hear about, aid for the Dominican Republic at the time.
well, think about this. If an earthquake hit the United States, well, it hits the United States all the time, right? And oftentimes you have a few hot spots, but if, an earthquake hits in Sacramento, is Santa Fe bothered? Well, no, it's far enough away. So the epicenter of the earthquake was on the Haitian side.
Okay.
And it really hit that. And so there were some, like, I don't know the proper terminology, but kind of like shock waves and whatnot that affected the Dominican, but not nearly to that extent. And plus aftershocks and
P waves and some other letter waves.
Yep.
I don't know.
But first off, the damage initially was like not comparable in the first place. And then just both what was built in Haiti was of a fairly low quality because of its history of poverty and government corruption. Just it was a powder keg in the first place waiting to go. And then Haiti at different times has been the poorest country on earth. And so its recovery was like an uphill battle. Whereas the Dominican is not the wealthiest, but for its like its population, it's doing okay. And it's a big like touristy like tourism and travel is a big part of its economy. And so it's just a different setup. And if it had been hit by the same earthquake, like it definitely would have been rocked and needs some aid, but it would have been able to recover much, much easier, as opposed to Haiti had very little way to like build itself back up.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah, just a mixture of unfortunate factors, like the location of the epicenter, the government at the time, the state of their infrastructure, all these things coming together to make it just not a good situation.
Absolutely. And I mean, even think about it, like if an earthquake hit Indianapolis, right? Let's say it hit like a low-income neighborhood versus it went a little bit north and hit Hamilton County, some like a wealthier suburb. Well, there would be aftershocks that might like affect the other, but it affecting, if it had hit a wealthier Hamilton County neighborhood, they would be able to rebuild much faster, have different like places that they could stay, have insurance to kind of build it back up. And so it'd be tragic, but they'd be able to recover much easier, as opposed to if it hit a like projects neighborhood in Indianapolis, well, you might actually get some deaths there that you would not get in Hamilton County because I hate to say it this way, but when you're dealing with low income housing, there are going to be times where things are not up to code, that their corners cut because builders can get away with it. And so I think the actual like physical toll would be worse there. The overall damage, because it's not as sturdy, would be worse. The lack of insurance would mean that like it getting built back would be worse. So just the recovery as well as the initial damage is just not comparable.
Right? All right. So I have one point on the earthquake discussion, then I want to get back to travel. This reminds me of, I think it was this year, it's pretty recent. Turkey was hit with a massive earthquake. And they have a history of earthquakes. And the last time they had a major one, they made this basically like earthquake relief fund type monetary policy where the government sets aside so many billions of dollars specifically for earthquake prep and relief.
All right, kind of like a government like earthquake insurance.
Yes, and I don't know if it's since been proven definitively, but the speculation is that that money was never spent on what it was meant for, and so when the earthquake actually hit, the damage was much worse than it would have been had all these buildings actually been up to code. So when you said like cutting corners, that totally makes sense. You can't earthquake proof a building very cheaply. Takes some very intelligent engineers and good materials to resist such powerful.
Yeah, and I would actually use that like terminology because I don't think you can earthquake proof a building. You can earthquake resist it though.
Yeah.
Like there's some crazy stuff that I've seen about like some Japanese buildings.
Right, they've got pendulums. Yeah. Like in the building.
Yeah, and
like dampeners and all sorts of weirdness.
Yeah, and those are great and they do wonders to resist it, but like Japan also got hit by a tsunami back in like 2012 and it just wrecked some stuff. And so you can resist it, but you really can't proof a natural disaster. You can resist
Mother Nature, but can't avoid her wrath, sadly. I don't know why she's so mad at us.
Yep.
But anyway, I must say you are very well traveled. I've only been to one other continent, and you've I think been to at least two.
I've had a few, but I'd love to hear yours first.
Okay.
All right. What brought you beyond North America?
Beyond these bounds. So, a lot like my first flight, which was to California from Indiana. My first trip outside of the country, unless you count like a brief drive to Mexico through like New Mexico. I wouldn't really count that. That was like basically going shopping with my sister. It didn't feel like I was in a different country at all. Mm-hmm. But I did fly to the Czech Republic in Europe, and this was a yo-yo related event.
Heck yeah.
And it was the World Yo-Yo Contest 2014, maybe 13. It's a little fuzzy now, starting to be farther back in my memory. But other details are pretty clear for me because, again, I'd never been out of the country, so everything felt so brand new and exciting. The main thing that stood out to me about the Czech Republic was that like almost palpable age of like all the architecture. I can't put an exact number, I'm not a historian, but every brick and arch and like church and chapel looked like it was from a totally different time period. And being in America, it's like you might see something that's like 200 years old that hasn't fallen apart, but there were things there that were like multiple hundreds of years, like more than 200 years old, for sure. And that was something I had never experienced before.
Yeah.
And it really put into perspective how young our country is, So that was really cool. Well before the yo-yo event, we got to, do our little tour of Prague. Another thing that stood out to me, or is more of a distinct memory, is there is a bridge that led to the after party once the yo-yo event was over. And for the arachnophobes, I'm sorry, but this bridge was covered in spider webs. Not like on the top, but like every space on the side just had the most massive spider web I'd ever seen.
Heck yeah.
And what didn't make sense to me is why no one cleared it. It's like, I feel like if that was in America, one person on that bridge would complain to some city official and they'd be like, all right, we gotta de-spiderize this bridge. But there it was just like part of the structure, almost.
Part of the charm.
Yeah, it's like nature. So that was cool. Don't get too close. But it was so surreal, like being on the bridge, looking like over or looking through these big spider webs at a river and then like a city in the background. It was like this weird vision that I'd never had, of like nature and then like old architecture, water, and then, my destination kind of off in the distance. That was a very, very cool experience. And then the actual after party was on a boat on that river, which was a first also for me. I don't know if I'd ever been on a seafaring vessel that large. I'd probably been on like a canoe at some point with like my family or something, but this was like a big boat, and it had everyone that was at the event plus some people that weren't even yo-yoers, just friends of yo-yoers. And I got to celebrate with the person who won, who was a close friend of mine and still is. I need to contact him. I don't know if you noticed earlier today, I was watching a live stream of a yo-yo player. That guy, his name's Gentry. He won that year. That was the first year he ever won Worlds. So it was just so fun to hang out with a bunch of yo-yoers, congratulate my friend who I had actually spent part of the summer with at his house in Chico, California. So the city where the National Yo-Yo Contest is held every year, or used to be held, they've since moved it. Mm-hmm. But that city is his birthplace. So it's like this weird series of events where this kid's born in the place where they've had the contest for like 20 years, grows up, becomes, one of the winningest yo-yoers of all time.
Well, there's the, nature versus nurture debate. Is that something where it was just like coincidentally there? Or
definitely
is it like
not.
he was in the place where...
He was in the right place at the perfect time. Because the Yo-Yo Museum is there. There are, yo-yoers from all over the country coming to his backyard every single year. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that helped mold him. Not to take away from his thousands of hours of very hard work, but that definitely helped him. Definitely.
No, and not to get, on too philosophical of a tangent there, but I think when you look at the individual, you give them all credit. But when you look at the environment, that's where you look at the statistics of like, how is that going to happen, right? Because the city was creating a place for somebody like that to come out, right? And so the statistics are there for somebody to like for there to be more yo-yoers come out of there. And then his own talents actually make that happen. So it's a both and, right?
Yes.
He worked hard, and he was in an environment where his hard work would be proportionally more rewarded.
Cool. And then a last distinct memory of that Prague trip is at the after party. Just being able to like go out on the deck with friends of mine and having I want to say a cigar with which I had never had at the time, but is like really nice, like expensive stuff. I don't know why I was there. With some Prague girl that I didn't even know. I think it was a girlfriend of a friend of a yo-yoer, you know, so like very many degrees removed, especially if you add me in there. And, you know, just being offered smokes from a local who barely speaks English, but was very, very fun to hang around. So like that's kind of the last distinct memory, because this is late in the night after all the yo-yoing's kind of done. People are still doing little powwow circles, but most people are yo-yoed out at this point. Mm-hmm. So the last thing people were doing were just hanging out on deck, drinking, smoking.
So it's not like a typical like college competition movie, like say a Pitch Perfect, where after they have a singing competition, they go back and sing some more.
No. The your fingers are just burnt out, your brain's tired.
You're ready to not yo-yo?
Yes. And it was at that point when other experiences feel even more fulfilling. You're like, I could just be in this place and relax and meet people. So all that to say that I really, really want to go back to Europe. If not Prague specifically, just for the nostalgia, just anywhere with that kind of sense of breadth and history.
So me and my brother, we just got back from our Europe trip, and when we were in London, our hotel was right next to Tower Bridge, which is right next to like the old castle, right? So you have this crazy view from Tower Bridge where you see the original like Tower Castle where, you know, the seat of like English power was for hundreds of years, and, you know, was built in something like 1100 or 1200, and that's where they keep the crown jewels. And so you get all this crazy history. Then right behind it, you can see these really artistic skyscrapers that have been coming up that are just weird shapes. Like there's one that's a big spire, one that kind of looks like an egg, one that's twisting and turning. And so it's this incredible blend of like old, new. Like I'll show you a picture once we finish up the cast, but that blend of old, new is so just, it really puts like things into perspective for you. And that's, like you said, that's something you don't get in the U.S. Because within the continental U.S., I think that, you know, in the Southwest, we might have a few architecture like digs or sites that have a little bit of like Native American history, but most like Native Americans in the continental U.S. were nomadic, so they don't really have like established buildings and things that you can like point to and see as like long history. So we, like you said, we only have about like 200 years of like things to point back on, whereas over there like you can find stone like structures that are 1,000 years old. And as much as there's controversy over the British History Museum, because, you know,
they took it from Egypt and then they took it from Zimbabwe and
it's
charged people to see it.
So
but who else would take care of it this well? We've got professionals that manicure the
not going to get into the politics of it, But as a purely experiential thing, it's like one of the coolest places I've ever like been to, because as far as seeing the history of the world and just like how old things are, and just this one exhibit alone that was going over like, so the Rosetta Stone is there, and so you get like a history of writing with different like bits and pieces of pottery that have like our earliest like recorded bits of writing, and then seeing that to the Rosetta Stone to like bits of like Egyptian hieroglyphics, and seeing the transformation of the world over time. It's absolutely incredible.
The world's first emoji language.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Yeah, but that's something where most of my travel up until this trip has been in some way philanthropic, right? I was going in order to accomplish some sort of goal or assist some sort of people in some way, which I love to do. But it was nice to do something that was purely for fun and enjoyment. Even if there were some twists and turns along the way, you know.
Yeah, you've told me
for
one.
Yeah.
We'll save it maybe.
Stories for another time about, you know, me getting assaulted and like adventures with my brother that were less than adventurous, but
other countries, because you weren't just in the UK.
Absolutely, we did some traveling around as well. But all that to say that, you know, what travel can do as far as just like your own personal like enjoyment, to your own personal growth, to just bringing new perspectives, it covers a lot of things that I think are beneficial for just being a human being and the human experience. Whether that's something that you can do on a large scale and cross oceans, or whether that's just getting outside your own neighborhood.
Right. And I would agree that in some ways the essence of being human is traveling when you must. Apparently we're all African if you trace us back far enough. So at some point, someone said, you know what? I'm going that way. And they did it. So, good on early humans for not staying in the same place forever, because the course of human history would be much different. And like you said, on a much smaller scale, good on you for getting out of your small town and going even, one town over.
Absolutely. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we were all coming out of Africa, I'm pretty sure that was around the Nile. So I think that...
Yeah, maybe the river really helped us.
Yeah, so all that to say that, some people still stuck around. And so nothing wrong with, being a homebody, but be willing to, like, step outside of that, right? So we still got people who are living near that origin, but we've also stepped out.
Yeah, it'd be funny, though, to think if those people... they just ended up back there. You trace their ancestry, and they did just a full, journey around the earth, and their great granddaughter was born back on the River Nile. But that's speculation, maybe for another day. This has been a fun one. I'm actually really glad it was inspired by your recent trip to Europe. What do we talk about? And I think travel actually did it. So
absolutely, it's been interesting hearing some of your nostalgic stories, both from like when you were young and just your yo-yo days.
Yeah, and in the future, I hope to do more of that traveling. And if you, the viewer, have done that or plan to do it, good on you, because there's a lot of benefit to be had. This has been a very fun episode of our public therapy, and I'm leaning into, so far, our best potential solution to these problems that we've put out is new experiences and new perspectives.
Yes, sir.
And travel can be good for that. So I'm Harold Owens.
I'm Joe Jason.
And we post these on Spotify, and now that we're video on YouTube every other Monday, we do also a check-in, kind of a mini episode on slightly related but sometimes unrelated topics to the main episode. So check both of those out. And I appreciate you all for watching. And until next time, thank you.